Woo! We are in hour 3 of Fantasy and Frames Wednesday. Welcome, everybody, back. We have Shoot the Gap, our IDP Fantasy Football show. I'm your host for today's show, Jorge Edwards, but it's really going to be the Justin Taylor show, if I'm being completely honest with you. Got JT Orange over on X. We're talking about our last group of rookies for IDP purposes for fantasy football this year. Of course, we're talking about the defensive backs. Yes, defensive backs matter. No, don't listen to all the hate that comes with people who don't like defensive backs. Oh, well, I can just swap out a defensive back. We're going to tell you which rookie we think you don't have to worry about swapping out. So stay tuned. For those of you who have just started to tune in for tonight's show, look, we have been cranking out great content here at Fantasy and Frames on Fantasy and Frames Wednesday across all of our social media channels, specifically on our YouTube channel, specifically on X and Facebook. At the 8 o'clock hour, JT and I were talking about Dynasty tight ends, and we actually made very convincing arguments for a lot of these tight ends out there, which I did not think we were gonna get to. I thought this was going to be a very short.
You were a little worried.
I was.
Can we do a whole show of tight ends? I'm like,
no,
we need
right.
a whole show of tight ends.
Right. I'm like, can we make this an hour? And by God, we made it an hour 5. So definitely something you definitely want to tune into. Last hour on Fourth and Frames with Chris Battistel, Rhett Manuel, and Drew Scott, we were talking about discrepancies that the four of us had in our dynasty rankings, which you can find over at fantasyandframes.com. And the conversation revolving around Rachaad White got so heated, I had to call in my tag team partner Justin Taylor to be like, "Hey, it's not fair. I need some more help." And
I think we won that argument. I think we won that argument.
I think you're right too. And seeing us out there now in the chant to dispute that right now, I'm going to say that we did win that argument. And I'm not somebody who will be afraid to ask for help. And so, thank you very much for jumping on, JT. Last hour, and of course
we're lockstep on the Rachaad White argument, so it made sense for us to tag up there and tag team together because I think you and I are feel exactly the same about the type of running back he actually is. So
you know who Rachaad White is for IDP purposes? He's Nate Gary of the Philadelphia Eagles, who got cut mid-season because he allowed an average depth of tackle of like 11 plus yards, which is like. Great. So you're letting the guy get first downs every time you're in coverage. Fantastic.
I feel like he's like a little like the Devin Bush. It's like, I get some tackles, but that's only because guys are running into me because I refuse to attack the line. And I'm basically getting the tackles. I'm getting blocked. And like I trip the guy as he's falling past me for an 8-yard gain. That's what I kind of feel like for the Rachaad White on the other side.
Exactly. See, guys, if the Fourth and Frames crew is watching right now, we are still talking about Rachaad White. That's how fire, quote unquote, that episode was.
Yeah,
wow,
I just fired up about it. That's for sure.
Yeah, I just said also the expression just now. That's so fire. Which when I do that around my wife, I immediately get the death stare, and it's like, translation: you're too effing old to say that.
Say that.
But you know what? Screw it. I'm doing it.
It don't matter.
Exactly. It just does not matter.
I still say awesome and legit all the time, like it's the 90s. So,
have you ever said too legit to quit recently, breaking out the MC Hammer?
Oh, that was one of my all-time favorite songs when I was about 8-9 years old. But I have not said that. But I do say awesome and legit, and the kids tend to look at us like look at me like, what are you saying? Like,
yeah,
really? Oh. I don't care. I'm going to keep saying it. I'm going to say it till I die. So,
damn right. Just a little bit of programming news before we get going into the defensive back rookies for IDP purposes. A week from tomorrow, folks, is the first round of the NFL draft. We do this every year here at Fantasy and Frames. We do a live stream of the very first round of the NFL draft. We have as many Fantasy and Frames people come on. We try to bring on guests. I can tell you right now, the very first guest who will be joining us to the first 5 picks of the NFL draft. You may have heard of him, Hutchinson Brown. Everybody likes to say he's the next it in the fantasy space. No. He's not the next it. He is it. All right. This young man knows his fantasy football and carries himself well. And we were very honored to have him join us during the Fantasy and Frames NFL
Yeah,
draft
Hutch is a
round
good
one.
guy. He's been on my show, The Stew with JT Brew, before,
Yeah,
breaking down the Eagles last year after the draft. He came in and we talked about the Eagles draft and kind of upcoming season. So Hutch is a real good guy.
absolutely. A little bit of also news this fall, we're excited to have the godfather of IDP, Gary Davenport at IDP Sharks on X. He's a part of the Fantasy and Frames family now. You can expect to see every week his waiver wire for IDP over at fantasyandframes.com. We couldn't be more ecstatic to have Gary Davenport join the family. So thank you very much, sir. And yeah, we also have Fantasy Football Weekly tomorrow with myself, Keith Fleming from the Daily Fix Show. He also does golf DFS content over at Fantasy Six Pack. And then we will have Rep Manuel from Fourth and Frames join us. And our special guest for the show will be Brian Ford from Going for Two Football at FF Junkie _. Just giving you our thoughts of, who are bulletproof rookies heading into the NFL draft that we're pretty confident about. And as we do on Fantasy Football Weekly every week, we'll just talk about whatever the hell we want to talk about because it's our show. We're going to do what we want to do. Boom. But enough about that. Let's get into why you're here. Defensive backs for IDP. Look, defensive backs matter. All positions in fantasy football matter. If you have a roster spot that has a specific designation for a position, like a quarterback, a running back, wide receiver, tight end, linebacker, defensive lineman, defensive back, guess what? You need to fill that defensive back spot with somebody good. And hopefully not somebody that you just toss out when they start losing production, efficiency or production in general. You want somebody in there who you can just set it and forget it. Like that's what we all want in fantasy football, right, folks? I mean, we want set it and forget it guys, so we don't have to worry about adjusting our lineups too much. And we're going to talk about these guys. We're going to talk about some of these rookies that we think we're pretty high on. JT has done such a tremendous job combing through all these defensive backs, going through these rankings, which you can find his over at Dynasty League Football or DLF. And so I kind of want to pick your brain for this episode, JT, and get into your first defensive back that you're pretty high on for IDP purposes. Who you got for us?
Yeah, so kind of like you were pointing out earlier, is a lot of people say, "Hey, ignore the DBs." I don't think you can ignore them. Obviously, linebacker is where you start, then you go edge, and you kind of work your way back. As far as you don't want to overdraft defensive backs, but they still matter. Like you said, you don't want to necessarily go taking guys way, way, way at the top, but don't wait till the very, very end to start just plugging and playing random defensive backs. So with that said, safety is always where you want to look at, and box safety specifically, as we used to call them, strong safety kind of back in the day. Most people call it box safety now, meaning you play a little closer to the line. You're not necessarily running that deep center field. The reason you want those guys is because they're going to help with the run. They're going to come up. They're going to make tackles. They're going to catch when running backs are catching, dump off passes out of the backfield. They're going to be able to make plays on those guys. And then a lot of times, depending on the defensive scheme, you'll see those guys blitz and do some things like that too. So you can possibly get some quarterback hurries, sacks, hits, depending on what your scoring system is. You can get those kind of numbers as well. So that's kind of where you want to look at safety spot. Then you kind of go to nickelback. The biggest thing with corners, shutdown corners, while they're awesome in real life, you want those guys. You don't want them on your team in fantasy because all they do is not give up catches. So a lot of times you don't want those guys. So with the league really going to a nickel package, a lot of 5 DBs, we've kind of said, like, it used to be called a nickelback. Now it's considered kind of a slot corner is what a lot of people will call it. And so those are the guys you want at cornerback. And the reason why is they're guarding the slot position. They're guarding the tight end. Again, they're playing closer to the line. Typically those slot receivers are making more receptions. So those guys are getting more chances at tackles, getting more chances at pass deflections. So those are kind of spot. If you hear me talking about like, oh, I like this guy because he's a slot corner, that's what I mean is I'm liking a guy that's going to cover the slot. He's going to play closer to the line because, again, if you're playing those shutdown corners, you're basically saying, I hope he gets an interception, or he's probably not going to score many points unless you have a crazy league where pass deflections count for a lot. But again, like sacks, pass deflections, you don't get a lot per season. You maybe will hit double figures, but it's not crazy high. So you kind of want to avoid that. And again, in the secondary, I know it's like the opposite of what you want to think. Sometimes you want guys that are on bad defenses, and you want them because they're going to be making tackles all the time because they're on the field constantly. And so that's something you got to think about too with DBs. Sometimes you get those guys on really good defenses, nobody makes it to them in the secondary. So they just don't make a lot of plays, where other teams you'll get guys you're like, man, he's not that good and his team's not that good, but he puts up crazy fantasy points. So sometimes you have to adjust your thinking a little bit when it comes to IDP, and sometimes you have to go with guys that are producing, even if they're technically not as good as other players. You're saying, hey, but his snap share is there, his percentage is high. Those types of things is what you want to look at for defensive backs on the IDP side. So now that I did, classic me with a huge introduction there. Go, Jorge. I'll let you jump in.
Before we get going, I just want to congratulate myself here, because you said Nickelback twice in that soliloquy, and twice I resisted the urge to actually sing music from the band Nickelback, which I know Chris Battistel, if you're watching, being a Canadian, you have your Canadian tuxedo on, listening to Nickelback every single night before you go to sleep. So I know you appreciate it. I'm sorry. Anyhow, continue.
No, you're fine. When my hair grows out really long, it's really curly. And I used to have someone that I work with. If we had Zoom meetings, she would always text me during the Zoom meetings, and it was like, "What are you doing? Getting ready for a video shoot?" And she would always give me a hard time because you said I looked like him from Nickelback. Because she would always make fun of my long curly hair when I used to have it about a year and a half ago. So I believe me, I know the Nickelback reference well.
Nice. All right, who you got for us the first up on the list?
So to me, if you're going DB, obviously landing spots are going to make a difference. But to me, the number one clear-cut guy is good for fantasy purposes, mind you, is going to be Tyler Nubin, safety from Minnesota. I really like him. 22 years old, a guy just made plays all over the field. He's physical. He gets a lot of tackles. He makes impact plays. And this is going to be high praise for him, but he's another, ex-Gopher. He reminds me a lot of Antonio Winfield Jr. And obviously Antonio Winfield Jr., anybody who plays IDP knows him because he was the number one scoring fantasy defensive back last year. And he was a guy, impact plays all over the place, forced fumbles, recoveries, sacks, interceptions, tackles. Guy did a little bit of everything. I think Nubin can be that type of safety in the NFL. I think he's probably a second round pick in the NFL draft. Not a lot of people taking safety early anymore. But if the landing spot hits, I really think Nubin is the top guy. Again, I think he can play that box safety. He, to me, is like Winfield. Even if he ends up playing the deep safety, kind of that center fielder, I still think he's good enough, athletic enough to make plays and kind of be in the mix. Even if he is playing a little bit farther away from the line. So I know that scared a ton of people off this last year on Antonio Winfield. Preseason, he was like, oh, I might play a little deeper safety this year, not in the box so much. And people are like, oh, man, is that going to crush his value? Well, he went out and was DB number one. So I like Nubin. He reminds me a lot of him. To me, he's the biggest impact outside of the next guy I'm going to talk to. He's the biggest impact defensive back in this draft.
You know what I really liked about him, and obviously, this corresponds to fantasy point production because obviously we're talking about IDP Fantasy Football, is you like the solo assists last year. 43 solo tackles, 15 assists, which you really like. So therefore you're getting greater tackle efficiency, greater fantasy points for your defensive back. What I really like, and which is really rare to find among defensive backs, is he had a sub 10% missed tackle rate, which is phenomenal. That's what you want from all your defensive players, your tackling players, your linebackers. And of course your box safety. So the fact that he has a great solo to assist, low missed tackle percentage, and he has, the versatility. He can get on the field. He allowed last year a quarterback rating when targeted of 39.6. So now it's kind of like we were talking about during our IDP show, our dynasty show earlier. You have to give coaches reasons to have you on the field. Okay. Well, this guy does it, making solo tackles, and not getting huge average depth of tackle metrics. He does it from a coverage perspective, allowing an NFL quarterback passer rating of 39.6. He just does a lot of things really well, really versatile. The Swiss Army knife, kind of going back to what you were talking about with Antoine Winfield Jr. Yeah, so I 100% all on board the Tyler Newman bandwagon here with you.
Yeah, and that's the thing. He's just sure-handed tackler. That's why you want him. He's going to come in the secondary and make plays. And if you're sure-handed, you're going to get a lot more solo tackles because of that. You're not going to have, I'm grabbing on a guy, somebody else jumps in to bring him down, and you're making the play. And again, as we all know, DBs, you want to make those tackles, but those impact plays is what really shoots you up fantasy rankings, because the way you can get those big games where you score a ton of points because you're making turnovers, doing those sorts of things. So he's a guy I like a ton. He to me is clear cut number one DB.
Nice. All right, who do you got second on the list there, JT?
So this one's a little bit off the depth chart compared to everyone else. And the reason I say this, if you go look at the DFL rankings, kind of where a lot of my cohorts have guys listed, I am one of the rare guys that I'm the highest by far on Cooper DeJean. I'm the only, I think there's maybe one other guy that have him in their top 20 overall. I have him at number 15 overall. So I'm obviously way higher on him than anyone else. And that's the cornerback out of Iowa. And I'll give you a couple reasons why I'm higher. And I almost would never have a cornerback this high. And the reason I'm telling you this is I actually think he's got crazy versatility. I think he's got crazy versatility. I think he can be used in a bunch of different ways. I would be very surprised if a team takes him and uses him as a straight outside cornerback. I think he's a guy that can play safety. And so that's been a little bit of the thing for a lot of people. They're like, well, is he a cornerback? Is he a safety at the next level? What is he going to be? Right. Now, for some people, that's a concern. For me, it's not, because I like the fact that I think that he can play anything. I think he could play slot corner. I think he could be a corner that moves back and plays safety and then turns up and slides up and plays corner in certain situations. The guy's got crazy athletic ability. I don't know if you saw this, Jorge, but somebody showed a YouTube video from high school of him playing basketball, and he's just dunking on everyone. Like literally just dunking all over getting oops, just doing just crazy, running down the lane, throwing two-hand dunks on people. And we already knew he was a really good athlete, but I was just like, I loved it. I was like, oh, that's fantastic. And then the other thing that really helps for me, now it got taken away the last couple of years with the special teams rules for punting and kick return, but the league with the changes this year, it seems like they want to bring that back. Now they want to bring it back differently because they wanted to, player safety and all that, but it seems like they want to get that back in the game. And for us people that played IDP for a long time, if you're an IDP league that counts kick and punt return yards, and you can find a cornerback or a safety that plays special teams, it's like a cheat code. And I always tell people that as Adoree Jackson, his rookie year, absolutely crushed in one of my IDP leagues, led me to the championship game. Of course, I got upset in the championship game, but he was one of my top scorers, and it was because not only did he get me tackles and all that on defense, but he kick and punt return, and he was really good at kicking and punt return. So I got really solid yards from him on that side. So it was just bonus points on defense. Cooper DeJean, if anybody's ever seen the highlights, he's got some crazy good returns. Obviously, the one that everybody remembers was, who were they playing in that game? Was it Nebraska or somebody? He had a return for a touchdown that got called back because they said he he fair catched it, which he didn't. He was kind of moving, and his arms were like moving as he was trying to get under because it was a sideline punt. And they blew the whistle saying he fair caught it, which he was like, I didn't fair catch that at all. Ended up returning it for a touchdown. They called it back, but it was a crazy return, crazy good return. I could see him now if it gets old later in his career, probably not, as we see with a lot of these guys. They take him off special teams as they get older and get more expensive. But he's a guy I could see as a rookie playing a couple different spots on defense, but also kick or punt returning for teams. And if he does that, and you, again, your league does count those points, I love that extra factor that he can bring you points doing stuff like that. I just think he can play in a lot of different roles. I think he's a guy that can rush the passer if you want to blitz him out of the secondary. So I'm not so convinced, or I'd say I'm not so concerned uh, where he plays. Now, if somebody just puts him on the outside at cornerback and leaves him all the way outside the whole time,
Right.
maybe. But if he's opposite side of another good cornerback and they throw at him because he's a rookie all year, I like it even better because now he's going to get tackles and pass deflections because they're going to throw at him all year. So he's my number 2 for DB. And usually if it's a cornerback, I want to be in a cornerback only starting league where you have to start a cornerback. But he's a guy, I think he's like a Kenny Moore that I would start him. I would start him anyway, even if he plays cornerback and you're in just a DB league. Now, not right away, but depending on see how his usage is, but he's a guy I think could be in that area where even if he does just play cornerback, he's going to be playable.
Excuse me. Before we get to your DB3, just want to give a shout out a couple in the chat. Drew 3MR, best IDP folks in the business. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much for the comments. I would say that you're one of the very best in the fantasy football space as well. So thank you very much. Appreciate it. Got Craig here. Gentlemen, you have 2 choices. Mamma Mia or Jersey Boys?
That's
a great question. The thing is,
help me with that one.
Here's the thing. You got to ask yourself this. It comes down to one thing. Do you like ABBA or does it annoy you? Because if you're okay with ABBA, you're going full blown Mamma Mia. If you don't, then if there's even a little ounce of hesitation, you got to go Jersey Boys, right? And where are you stand?
I agree with you. I think you hit that on the head.
There we go. Perfect. Let's get into. Thank you guys for commenting. Let's get into your number 3 here. Cameron Kitchens, excuse me. So when looking over his metrics here, the solo to assist 52 to 11 per PFF, the lowest missed tackle rate of 13.7%. Good, decent numbers here. Played a lot of free safety last year, playing 379 at free safety versus box at 110. Why do you like him for fantasy?
He's another guy I think could be versatile. I think they could bring him up. I think depending on where he lands and they use him might move him down a bit for me. I like his ability outside of Newman. I think there's a lot of these safeties in this group of rookies that you're just not 100% sure how teams are going to play him. So there's a couple guys that are a little bit smaller, but they got good speed. So you're like, they're maybe not natural free safeties, but like their size and everything kind of says they're a safety. Do some of these guys get moved to that slot corner? So that's always, an interesting move to see where some of these guys go. I like Kitchens. I've been higher on him. There's a couple guys that are lower on my list currently that are starting to creep up on him, to be honest with you. So I right now I have him there at number 3. I could see him dropping to maybe 6 or 7, depending on some of these spots. He's the guy I'm least confident about right now. I have to be honest with you on where I have him ranked on these DB, because there's a couple guys as I've been diving deeper into these rookies, a couple of these guys are starting to really impress me. Kitchens was one of my guys that was up there. Originally, he was my number 2. Then Cooper DeJean passed him. And now I have a couple guys like really, nipping at his heels to take over that spot. I like him, but if he plays a lot of deep safety for depending on what defense he ends up, it might knock him down my rankings.
All right, well, let's jump to your DB4 then, because I'm noticing some parallels here. Let's talk about Javon Bullard, safety out of University of Georgia. This blew me away when I saw this stat here. You know, a quarterback rating allowed when coverage of 35.3. I don't think I've talked about or been involved in a show where we've talked about a defensive back that's allowed such a low quarterback rating when targeted. You know, we look at the tackle numbers from last year, 38 to 11, great solo to assist, low missed tackle rate around 10.9. Just does everything well. You know what I mean? But again, we get into the situation of like usage and utilization, and the same can be said for a lot of different positions on the offensive side of the ball. And of course, I'm trying to draw parallels to offense and defense so that people who are scared of IDP don't get too scared, because there are parallels you could draw between offense and defense that make it less intimidating. So we talked about it on Dynasty 365 earlier today with the tight end position. Tight end and defensive back kind of, I feel at least, have some type of like parallels in terms of, well, from week to week, tight end can be a tight end 20 or a tight end 1, and the same thing could be for a defensive back. But I think at the same time, you want to look at the efficiency. You want to look at the versatility that these defensive backs bring to the table. Why do you like Javon Bullard so much?
Again, I when I'm looking at these guys, the guys I want for fantasy are guys that can move around and do some different stuff. They can cover some different guys. If they get stuck where, hey, we're just playing too deep safety all the time, I'm probably avoiding a lot of those guys. Now, a lot of teams have gone to that just to kind of deal with some of these really good quarterbacks throwing over the top. That's what teams have kind of adjusted to. But if I'm taking a DB and that's pretty much all they're doing, then I'm probably going to avoid them. Just because I want a guy that moves around, is going to be able to do different things. He's going to get involved in different areas in the passing game and on defense. So he's a guy who's high up there right now, just because I like the efficiency in college. But that could be adjusted depending on where teams. It'll be interesting to see what teams think about him, whether they think they want to keep him in that spot or whether he gets moved around a little bit. Because he's like Dijon. I think he's got some ability to play corner. I think he can play slot corner. I definitely think he can move around, and where these guys land and how they use them will be big, because a big one I talked about last year for people was Brian Branch out of Alabama. And he kind of went up and down people's lists. And they're like, is he a safety? Is he a corner? What does he end up really playing? Well, he got drafted to a nice landing spot in Detroit, and they put him at slot corner, and he excelled at slot corner. So he kind of played, which is nice, because then they were like, is he a deep safety? Is he a strong safety? He kind of played that in between for them, where he was like, oh, I can drop deep if I need to, but I'm also going to play close to the line. I am going to blitz sometimes. We're going to use them different ways. So I think some of these guys, if they end up on a team that runs, especially these teams that run mostly 2 linebacker sets, and you become that slot corner, now you're kind of the small third linebacker. Oh, I like that a lot. That's way more enticing to me. And especially if you play in a league that starts a cornerback, which I do play in quite a few leagues where you got to start 1 cornerback and 2 safeties. I want that guy that's a safety, or that's a corner, who's like slash safety slash linebacker. Those are the guys that can score you sneaky points and can win you a position, kind of like having a high-end tight end. You can get that cornerback that's going to outscore whoever you're playing against week to week. They're going to outscore that position, where some other guys are going to be counting on an interception or like a pick 6 from the cornerback to score any points. And you're going to have a nice floor with a real high ceiling with one of those guys.
I 100% agree with that. At the end of the day, you have to follow for IDP the snaps. Where are they playing the most? Whether it's, especially in cornerback specific leagues that are out there. I know Sleeper doesn't do that, but I know ESPN does that. I need to double check with CBS. Obviously, MFL has options for quarterback specific leagues. But if I'm right there with you. If I have a cornerback here who's playing a high number of box snaps and is being that next de facto linebacker at the defensive level, I'm taking that all day from a cornerback right there.
And that's where I brought up Kenny Moore earlier from the Colts, right, because the Colts tend to run a lot of 2 linebacker sets. That's just kind of it almost has turned into their base defense. And so that's where you get a guy like Kenny Moore who's kind of playing that slot corner. He kind of technically, even though he's a smaller guy, he kind of technically is playing that third linebacker spot. And that's where you can see where he's in the mix on a lot of plays. He's coming up on screen passes, getting a lot of tackles. He's got him, last year. If you had him, he won you some weeks with some pick sixes. He had that 1 week we had 2 in the same game, which was just boom. I mean, one of the highest IDP scoring weeks I've ever seen in my life. I mean, he absolutely murdered that week. So those are the type of guys that, that can do that. So like you said, you want to really early on, especially these rookies, follow that snap share, not only how much they're getting, but where they're playing. Where are they getting those snaps? So I think that's very important. I think a great point by you there.
I want to get to your DB5 here because when I look at the metrics, I get excited. When I look at the where the snaps are coming from, I get excited. I just see what I like to call hashtag tackle machine, profiles. This guy jumps off the screen. I'm talking about Jaden Hicks, safety, Washington State. We go back to last year per PFF, 64 64 solos, the 17 assists. Yeah, the high missed tackle rate is a little concerning at 14.7%. But he was number 1 in the Power 5 conferences in defensive stops. He allowed when in coverage a quarterback rating of 73.3. But there's no mistaking where he's lining up on the field wherever he lands in the NFL. He had 456 box snaps compared to 300 in coverage. This guy is a hashtag tackle machine now.
Yeah, so I tell you what, he's my biggest riser right now. The more I've dived into this, he's at 5 right now for me. I have to tell you, he's closer to 2 than he is 5 in my head right now. He is like inching up my rankings. I'm thinking there's a good chance by the time it's at the post draft that he's my number 2 guy. I think he's going to be on a team that knows how they want to use him. And like you said, I think he's a sideline to sideline guy. He can make plays all over. Super tough player, super tough guy. The more and more, I had somebody, I wish I could think off the top of my head who it was. I had somebody that turned me on to him. It was like, hey man, have you watched a lot of Jaden Hicks? I'm like, not much. They're like, I would look into him a little heavier. And I was like, okay, cool. So I jumped on, started looking at him. I'm like, I can't believe I was so low on this guy. I'm like, oh man, I really like him a ton. And then, like you said, one more you get into the metrics, the missed tackles is really the only thing that really kind of scares you a little bit. But right. I also, he didn't have a ton of help on defense. So I think a lot of times he was like diving to make plays because he didn't think he was going to have someone helping him. So I think NFL teams are really going to like him. I could honestly see him being the second safety off the board in the NFL draft behind Newman, because I think there's going to be a team that really, really likes him. So he's a guy, like I said, he's 5 for me right now. But if, say, Cooper DeJean got drafted and somebody says, now we're just going to play him at straight corner, like outside corner, and Hicks is in a spot where like you looking at the defense and you're like, oh, dude, he's going to have to like look terrible in camp where he's not going to be the starting like box safety. If he's the box safety, like you look at it, you're like, oh, he's probably pretty much going to start as a box safety because he's a mid-second round to late second round pick. He's moving on my board. He'll end up being number 2 for me when it's all said and done.
Nice. I want to talk about this next player next because you have him as your defensive back 7, and one of our writers here at Fantasy and Frames, Peter Petrovic from Serbia. We have Fantasy and Frames representation in Serbia, which I thought was a cool little fun fact for him. He put out an IDP prospect profile back in February about Mike. Is it Sandristil?
I always butcher. It's one of those names that I know there's like too many letters in there that you actually don't say. Like you just skip them. They're like silent. So I watch a ton of Michigan being a Big Ten country. And I swear I've heard his name said like 100 times on broadcast and I can't ever still get it right. So,
Here,
so
right. So here's the funny thing on Instagram. According to the article by Peter Petrovic, who you should be following over on X at C0PE4. Loves his IDP, loves fantasy football, just a great follow. He said in one of the paragraphs describing his background, Sandra Stroll refers to himself on Instagram as Frozone from the Incredible movies. So if we ever get an issue where we're having trouble mispronouncing his name, just go with the default Frozone because that's what he calls
I
himself.
like it. I think that's
Okay.
a great move. Hey, and
Um,
hey, you have to be a stud DB in the NFL when you got a nickname like that, right?
right.
It just that's how it works out. If you got an awesome nickname, you're going to end up being a good DB in the NFL.
No, 100%. Again, I feel like this is another situation of a cornerback um, where you are seeing the slot usage. Back over the course of his career, he found himself 72% of the time playing in the slot. Uh, you saw this, you can go through the stat line. See, let's go back to 2023, 15 games, 26 solos to 18 assists. Um, you know, the thing that gets me is the interceptions. Like again, these slot cornerbacks are constantly getting targeted. You think about the NFL, you think about offenses in general. What do you want out of your receiving court? You want to move the ball down the field. What did Hank Stram say? I'm matriculating the ball down the field in Super Bowl
Yep.
one. That's shocker. That's what offenses do, right? And therefore, how do they do that? They take offenses. They go after the slot cornerbacks because they know that area of the field is so difficult for these cornerbacks to patrol. There's a lot of easy yards that offenses go after. That's why you kind of look at slot wide receivers in fantasy when you get down to the middle rounds and late rounds of your draft. The same thing can be said for cornerbacks, specifically slot cornerbacks in your IDP drafts. And Sam Stroll is just he does it. He makes plays on the ball. What do you have to say about Sam Stroll?
Yeah, I like him a lot. He is another guy moving up my rankings. I think the way we had him ranked, I think right now he's DB7 on DLF's rankings. I actually have him just slightly higher than that. I have him right behind Hicks. So he's
Nice.
my guy right there. He's number 6 for me. Again, like you said. So the thing about him is he came to Michigan as a wide receiver. So that's why he gets those picks. He's got good hands. He's got great instincts because he played wide out. Now they looked at him and they said, you're a good wide receiver, but we think you could be an awesome defensive back. And Michigan had one of the best defenses in the nation the last 2 years, and he was a huge part of that. I like him a ton. I think he could be a ultra productive slot corner. I think he's going to go to a team that says, "Hey, we're running this as like our primary defense because we want to keep him on the field all the time." If that's the case for him, again, he bumps up my board. If he ends up on any kind of team that runs a pretty much a base 4-2 where they're running, 5 DBs, a majority of the snaps, I love it because that's his bread and butter. He's not going to play on the outside. He's not going to play safety. He is a slot corner. That's just who he is. And he did it at Michigan where, not everybody in the Big Ten was spreading it out all the time. There was a lot of teams that were trying to run the ball, trying to hold the ball, a lot of defense, and he still was in the mix on everything because they just want him in there. And he was a team leader. Everybody on that defense loved him. I think he's a guy that's going to end up having a really nice long NFL career. I like him a lot. Cornerback leagues like Dijon, he's the guy where I am targeting him big time in leagues where I have to start a cornerback. Kind of like Devin Weatherspoon out of Illinois last year. Absolutely loved him. People are like, "Oh, you're gonna take a cornerback?" I'm like, "You don't understand. This guy is just a football player. He's a beast. He comes up, makes tackles. I loved him, and he." Started off with the injury, but then he was phenomenal down the stretch for Seattle. I think he could be that type of player. He just has that dog mentality. He wants to get in there. He wants to win. He'll do anything it takes. Whatever they ask him to do, he's going to do. I really like him. I think he's underrated, but I think his upside is really, really high, especially when you get him in a secondary where he's just learning every day how to play defense. He hasn't played a ton in his career. I just think he's going to get better and better and better.
The last defensive back I want to bring up, and this is a wild card. I didn't talk about this before the show started, so I apologize, JT, for just throwing this guy at you. But I want to go back to Peter Petrovic's work here at Fantasy and Frames because he did another IDP prospect profile on a safety that I am biased towards because he's a Maryland Terrapin. You look at last year, he was number 4 in the Power 5 in box snaps. Let's see here. He was number 12 in defensive stops. He was number 11 in solo tackles. Like just a lot of, pardon the pun, box checking metrics and box checking things you want out of a safety for fantasy football purposes. May not do the splashy things, may not get you the coverage, big play, impact plays, but as a steady tackling safety. I know Miss Rainey over at now RPO Football, which by the RPO Football, shout out to Leo, aka Master IDP, just great football content they have coming over there. Just wanted to give them a shout out. We'll talk about Bo Braid, safety, University of Maryland. Some comps have had him to Brian Branch without the big play upside there. Obviously, he's playing more of the safety role. I know I'm throwing you completely on the spot here. Do you have any thoughts on him at all? Some of the tendencies he has is that he's a high IQ player. He likes to blow up plays. He can blow up plays in coverage. He's a great tackling safety, and that's what you want. At the end of the day, like, just give me the goddamn tackles and get out of my way.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
I agree with you. Is he the most athletic guy? No. Is he going to make the most splash plays? No. But is he a guy that can be a solid defender? And again, like you said, get you the tackles in fantasy football? I think he is. And we've seen the last couple years from Maryland. It seems like they produce 2 spots, right? They either get us flashy wide receivers or pretty solid safeties. Like that's what we've been getting from Maryland the last couple years. Nick Cross, who's on the Colts, I think is kind of the opposite of him. Nick Cross was more the athletic guy who you loved all the traits, but didn't necessarily have it all together. And sometimes he came up too fast and he would miss those tackles. I think Brett's the other way. He's the guy's like, oh, I'm like a little more IQ. I'm going to slow down. I maybe am not going to make as many flash plays, but I'm going to make the smart play. I'm going to make the tackle. I'm going to keep somebody in front of me. So I definitely think he's a guy. I haven't heard a lot of talk about him around the league, so I don't have a good feeling of where he might go as far as NFL draft capital, but he's definitely a guy I want to keep an eye on because there's a couple teams out there that are pretty safety needy. If you go look at their depth charts right now and you're like, I don't like the group they have right now. And you can see one of these rookies, if they end up on a unit like that, I'm going to take a lot longer look because I'm going to be like, oh, does this guy have like a legit shot to play? And the big thing with rookie DBs, most people don't want to be stashing those guys on their roster on the bench.
Right.
It's just the way it is. You only have so many bench spots. I'll occasionally have a guy that I like that doesn't play a lot early on. Maybe I'll stash him on a taxi squad. If I have like a really big taxi squad bench, I'll put those guys. But a lot of times guys don't want to hold on to those guys. So he might be one of those guys you don't take in your rookie drafts, but you keep an eye out.
Right.
And if he ends up in the right spot and he gets a chance, he might be one of your first waiver wire moves if you need help at safety, if he ends up, in a good situation. So I think he's a good sleeper guy to keep your eyes open for.
Not the player comp, but the situation. He reminds me of PJ Locke for the Denver Broncos last year. Came out of some obscurity. And what's the name of the safety who got hit for all the late hits, or the defensive receiver? He went to Houston afterwards. This is going to drive me crazy. It doesn't matter. There's a very bad man who was playing safety and hitting people above the neck, and he got released because of the poor play. And PJ Locke stepped in, is where I'm kind of going with this. And PJ Locke didn't do a lot of great things, but we did really well is tackle. And that's what you want out of somebody who could potentially help you down the stretch of your fantasy season. And again, PJ Locke was not somebody I drafted, but he's somebody that I acquired off of waivers because I just got ahead of the curve there, and it helped me, well. And you and I, JT, have talked numerous times that defensive backs can win you fantasy championships. You shouldn't shy away from that. And so if you have somebody who lands in the right, Kareem Jackson, boom.
Kareem Jackson. You know what? I was thinking Jackson in my head. And I'm like, I think it's Jackson. What was his first name? Because I have Justin Simmons in a ton of leagues.
Right.
I had him in a couple leagues too. And then when Simmons went down, I was like, I need to find somebody to replace. And I went to pick up Jackson in a bunch of leagues, and then he kept getting suspended. I'm like, shit. And then I missed the boat on Locke. But I think what you're saying is correct. Was he one of the best DBs in the league? Like, no. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But he got you points. Exactly. Fantasy wise, opportunity got him points. And that's where I think we're like, we say some of these guys, they might not rank super high, but if you get them in the right situation, they can get you points. And in fantasy, people don't care what the metrics are. They care what the points you score. It doesn't matter how high your PFF grade is.
That's right.
You just want the guy that gets you points, whether that's tackles, assists, anything. You want to get those points.
100%. And with that is going to wrap up our 3-week stint talking about rookie prospects for IDP heading into the NFL draft. Obviously, after the NFL draft, once we know landing spots, here at Fantasy and Frames, we'll be putting out rookie profiles more on offense as well as for IDP, kind of giving you an idea of like, okay, this is what they did well in college. This is what their situation is, where they're in the pros, what is the realistic upside for the short term as well as long term. And not to mention, we'll probably do a couple IDP rookie drafts there. Got Craig in the chat again, coming through in the clutch with the Kareem Jackson. Says, great show, fellas. Always entertaining and informative. Thank you for tuning in, Craig. And thank you for the other guy's movie reference. I totally forgot about the Mamma Mia or Jersey Boys. It's the tickets that he used to bribe. Anyhow, sorry.
That's right. I told that, you know what? I'm usually good about that stuff. And that one went right over my head. I'm usually all about the movie quotes, and I totally missed that one.
Yeah, I feel ashamed. But anyhow, so that's what we've been doing the past 2 weeks. If you miss any one of those episodes, whether we're talking about defensive linemen, linebackers, or you're just starting to tune in now and you missed our whole talk about defensive backs, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts to the Fantasy and Frames podcast. The episode will be going out tomorrow morning. Whether you're heading to work, going for a stroll, doing whatever, tune the podcast on. Hear what we have to say. You can catch all that information. If you're a visual person, you know what? Head over to our YouTube channel. While you're there, hit that subscribe button and notification bell so you're notified when Fantasy and Frames puts out our awesome content that we always try to aspire to. I hope that you all really enjoy it and are getting something out of it. That's what it is. At the end of the day, this is for you. This is for all you fantasy football fanatics out there. You are why we do this and why we take such pride in the quality of work that we put out there. So you can watch all the episodes there. Before we get out of here, JT, anything you want to plug or talk about?
Just check out IDP rankings on Dynasty League Football DLF. Yeah, I've got those IDP rookies in. I'll be doing those, and as they get going, I'll jump back in and start as we start seeing some where these guys end up. I'll start doing my top 150. I've updated a little bit. I haven't deep dived into it yet to kind of really make changes, but I've been focused a little more on the rookies here pre-draft to kind of see where these guys move along. So check me out there. Hoping to have a couple more articles on IDP players I like coming up on the season here on Fantasy and Frame. So I'm going to try to knock out some of those here. Recently, I've been knocking out a ton of rookie stuff. Also on DLF, my running back. I did a 4-part series on the rookie running back. So if you're into that, check that out. And like I always like to plug my fantasy hockey show on the Stew with JT Brew. We'll be on in about 5 minutes here tonight. So we run that every Wednesday night, typically before or after I do the Shoot the Gap show. So
there we go. Well, let's not keep the hockey fans waiting. Go Washington Capitals somehow.
The Capitals got in. It hurt my heart because I'm a Red Wings guy. I mean, what a way to
Oh,
lose. 3 seconds left. They score to tie it, get it to OT. One of the guys on the show with me, his buddy works for the Caps, and he got a big bonus for them making the playoffs. So I feel good for him. I feel good for I can't beat. Yeah, I'm distraught the Detroit lost, and didn't make it in. But I do have some friends that are Caps guys, and so feel good for those guys. I mean, they made a heck of a comeback this year to end up getting in the playoffs from where they started at the beginning of the year. So quite a run by them. And I tell you what, it was just exciting down the stretch. 4 or 5 teams in the mix to the last 2 games of the year. So that's partly why I love fantasy hockey. Real hockey and fantasy hockey all together. So for all the Caps fans like you, the East Coast guys, good luck to them. They're going to have a heck of a tough matchup in the playoffs, but hey, making it in is always awesome.
Boom. And that's the lesson of the show. Always make it in. Use your own mind and how you want to interpret that. You dirty minded people, shame on you, but that's funny. Anyhow, for JT, I'm Jorge. This is Shoot the Gap. We'll be back next week getting you ready for NFL draft. Peace.